Welcome back, everybody. Excited to have you here for another awesome episode of Agile Table Topics, episode 3. Welcome back. And today I have two amazing guests all the way from the United Kingdom. So first we have Tom Geraghty, who is the founder of Psych Safety. And we also have Tim Beattie, the founder, actually the CEO of Stellafai. So Tom, tell us a little bit about, tell the audience a little bit about yourself first, please.
Thanks, Homer. Yeah, cheers. My name's Tom Geraghty. I'm based in the UK. My I'm passionate about psychological safety, safety cultures, safety science, and all the sort of associated goodness. I founded psychsafety.co.uk a couple of years ago. After well, during the pandemic, actually, I think at the start of the pandemic, and the context behind that is that I've got sort of nearly a couple of decades experience of leading and managing teams, particularly technology teams, but teams in other domains as well. And at some point in my distant past, got really passionate and enthusiastic about psychological safety, even though I didn't know what the word was. The word for it came later, but I knew I was passionate about something. And then the word popped up, and that was what sort of opened all the doors for me. So yeah, that's what led me here, and super pumped to be here.
I'm super pumped to have you here as well. Excellent. And Tim, tell the audience a little about yourself.
Cool. Thanks, Omar. Thanks, Tom. Awesome to be here. This is really exciting. So I'm Tim Beattie. Also based in the UK. Currently sitting just outside Belfast in Northern Ireland, which is where I'm from. If you can pick that up from my accent. Um, and so I've spent the last 20-ish years increasingly getting more and more interested by things like lean and agile and lots of cultural ways of working that feed their way into things like DevOps. And I've kind of come on a journey to working for lots of big companies that did things in a very inefficient way. Always thinking there must be better ways of doing things, and I've sort of slowly adapted what I've been doing and where I've been employed and who kind of stuff I've been working on to respond to the things that were frustrating me a little bit. Um, and I recently wrote a book about DevOps culture. Not so much a techie book, but more a ways of working and how the culture is a really important ingredient to that. Um, but when I distill everything down, agile and lean and DevOps and design thinking and all of these great things that I've picked up over the years, I've kind of now come to realize the common denominator is the idea of delivering, really high impacting outcomes. And ideally measurable, the idea that you can see what you're doing and why you're doing it, and being able to sort of see needles move and not move and things like that. I just find it's a much more way of connecting your work to a purpose and connecting that purpose to another purpose. So that's the essence that is behind the startup that I've co-founded called Stellafai. So Stellafai is a platform and a consulting organization that helps organizations get the best out of measurable outcomes and connecting strategy to execution. So it's kind of early days. We've been only going for a few months, but kind of super excited by the MVP that we've built and now just getting out there and yeah, absolutely loving it at the minute. So I get the feeling the stuff we'll be talking about today will be very much in the kind of the space that I love talking about. So excited to be here.
Yes, very excited to have both of you here. And as a reminder for folks, the way Agile Table Topics works is that we combine table topics from Toastmasters with agility. So I have a nice bowl here full of random questions that I've curated from LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and also other places. And basically, the way this works is we grab a topic and we talk about it. So, are you both ready to get started?
I am
Ready?
ready.
All right,
Let's do it.
here we go. Digging into the
Okay.
bowl, and our first question is, let's see. Ooh, are you providing probability distributions to set expectations? Why or why not? Oh, let me read that one more time. Are you providing probability distributions to set expectations? Why or why not? That's an interesting one.
I can kick off with some thoughts there. So I guess I'm just going through my head. What do we mean by probability distribution, and what do we mean by setting expectation? Setting expectation, I think, is probably easier, and setting expectation, or maybe not incorrectly setting expectation, is an important thing, and that is something I think there's lots of tools that help with. The most powerful one is visualization. Visualization of everything. Your work, your priorities, what you're doing next, what you've done, and what you're planning to do, the way the team's working, etc. So I think that's got to be the best way to set expectations. I've always had the saying, show not tell. It's very easy to write some words down, or write some numbers down, or a percentage down. It's much harder to kind of pretend that you're doing that without actually showing. So show not tell is a large. So I don't specifically use probability distribution as a tool on its own. I think implicitly might be in some of the practices that I use. What I do, what I'm trying to focus more and more is on confidence, and being able to assess confidence, or at least have a conversation about confidence. How confident are we in achieving something, either a group of people or an individual? Because I find that's a really good leading indicator to set expectations. And there's some very nice little simple tools that help do that. Like confidence votes, fist of five, things like that. So I don't know if I completely answered the question, but yeah, definitely there's some essence in that stuff. Definitely see the importance, but I have different tools that I use.
Very good. How about you, Tom?
Yeah, so just to build on what Tim said, really, I think so. And I'm assuming that we're talking about sort of estimates in terms of delivery dates and estimates in terms of size, and those sort of estimates, and setting those sort of expectations in this case. And I think probability distributions are like a powerful, like Tim was saying, like anything visual is a powerful tool to help people understand and set expectations and understand what's likely to happen, and we implicit within an estimate, or any sort of, in quote, promise of delivery is a normal distribution of, so we're describing this point at the top, and it might fall left or right of that, but actually, in reality, it's probably not a normal distribution of the probability, is it? It's actually probably shifted left or shifted right, depending upon. I know this is my pet topic, my golden hammer, but depending on, to a degree, the psychological safety in the group, and whether they're trying to say, whether they're telling the manager what they want to hear, or maybe it's not the manager, maybe it's someone else, but telling the product owner what they want to hear. And I think that's a that's a huge point there. Like, and I was talking to a product owner a few weeks back who we were talking about psychological safety, and one of the things they realized was that when presented with a long estimate, or an estimate that they thought was too long, or too far away, whatever, they realized that they were almost involuntarily like rolling their eyes, sighing, sitting back, or giving sort of non-verbal signals that, oh, that's not what I wanted to hear. And all those little signals were piling up on the group, and the group were always slightly over their estimates, i.e. their estimates of delivery were always a bit too optimistic. And I think the product owner realized that even though they weren't punishing people for being late, they weren't doing any, they weren't being a mean, nasty product owner, but they were giving these little signals that meant that the estimate was overly optimistic, and it didn't really match reality in practice. So yeah, I think that's where it comes to for me, I think. Yeah.
That's made me. Sorry, I was going to say that what Tom just sort of triggered a couple of follow-on thoughts right for me. So I see a lot of bad press for things like story points and burn downs and velocity, and how these are terrible things and a few years ago they were sort of seen as wonderful things, and I'm kind of questioning why is that changed. And I actually still see goodness in all of those things. I think what Tom's saying about the psychological safety, that's where they've been turned into something that they're not. So I think all of those things are there for one reason, one principal reason, and that is to get some conversation going. And actually, the numbers, the distribution doesn't matter. They should be thrown away. The problem is, people pick up and then they start to misuse and abuse, and that's what's created all of that negative emotion on how they become bad things. So, tools by themselves, when they suddenly get into the wrong hands, can become a bit dangerous and not valuable at all, damaging actually.
Yeah, I'll add to that. One of the first things I've thought is like, are you trying to, like, coming from previous life in the federal government space is like, you can use expected set dates, like, hey, if you don't meet this date, you're going to get punished. You won't meet your bonus, you won't meet your quota, versus like, there are unknown unknowns, there's ambiguity sometimes when setting expectations, because stuff happens, things, as both of working in software, is that sometimes you just don't hit your date because of just things that you don't expect, that come up, security issues, or issues in your production environment, things like that go out, and it just goes crazy. But trying to use a probability distribution, I can see how it would be good, but sometimes I like listening to both feels like, especially about the psychological safety part, is like, is the person asking this, like, are they trying to make sure, like, hey, we said that we're going to hit this mark on this date, and we have the data to show that we'll get there. Okay, cool. But what happens when something goes wrong? Because ultimately things go wrong all the time. So I question this too, about the psychological safety. Like, are you in an environment where, hey, if you have to shift right, is it okay as long as you're able to provide reasoning why, and then, hey, we hit an issue, here's our solution to it, and we should hit our mark on a week or two, a month later. Like, I just hope that's a safe environment that you can do that. I know waterfall days where, hey, we're gonna get done in a year. 2 years later, hey, we'll still get done in a year. It's kind of hard and crazy. All right, cool.
Absolutely.
That was a fun question to kick things off.
Well, yeah.
Wow, really got the brain going.
No.
All right, let's go on to our second question. Let me dig into the bowl here. All right, not looking. All right, here we go. Ooh, how do you do the fine dance between meeting the team where they are at and getting them to follow the framework? So one more time, how do you do the fine dance between meeting the team where they are, wherever they are at, and getting them to follow the framework? So I'm gonna jump into this one immediately, because there was a quote. I stole this from Philip Double. He's out of North Carolina, and I use this analogy all the time, where the maturity of someone depends on where they are at, right? So people will say, "Hey, we want to do Scrum, we want to be Kanban, we want safe." Okay, well, where is your maturity level? And the analogy he uses, you must be this tall to ride. When you were a kid, you went to the amusement park, you saw that giant loop-de-loop roller coaster. He's like, I want to go on that, but you must be this tall to ride. You are not at that level. You can go on a small Scooby Doo ride, and then you grow into that and you mature up. Oh, I passed the Scooby Doo. Now I can go to the Snoopy ride. And then you grow into that, and then you can work your way up to the volcano. Right, with the loop de loop and all the double stuff. And so when I saw this question, that's the first thing that popped in my mind is, doing that finance is like, you have to meet the team wherever they are at and then grow them eventually. And sometimes you have to have those crucial conversations with them, like, hey, I know you want this nice, bright, shiny thing, but you need to start with the building blocks, the basics, build your foundation, and then we'll grow into that.
I think there's some interesting points here to ask about. So I think there's some interesting points to ask about what, like, just like you were saying, Omar, really, like, echoing that, like, what the framework is there to achieve some sort of goal. And this is sort of what Tim was talking about earlier, I think, before we started recording. And like, frameworks only exist to serve some function, achieve a goal, do thing X. So when you're sort of asking a team to follow a framework, and if there's resistance to it, or there's friction, or there's or it takes a while to sort of get up to maturity, or sort of ability to follow the framework, like there's some building blocks, there's some steps to work on. The goal isn't following the framework, is it? The goal is doing the stuff, and building the thing, and generating a good outcome. And you may well find that step 1 and step 2 on the framework actually lead to a different framework or practice being adopted than the framework that you originally were shooting for. And I think that's I guess the dance of where we're sort of the compromise between meeting people where they're at versus following the framework, because we're not trying to follow the framework, we're trying to take the steps forward, and as long as we're moving forward, that's good. Like, we may decide that our destination in terms of how we do it is something else. Like, if we're trying to climb a mountain, we do have a route in mind, but if we end up following a different route to the top, that's cool. Like, we got to the top, we made changes, we adapted, and so I think that's a crucial message for the team as well, that they're not expected to follow this rigid framework, where they're expected to come on the journey with us, and their feedback is as important as anyone else's, if not more important, actually. Yeah.
I mean, the question instantly takes my head to shuhari. If you're familiar with shuhari, the sort of Japanese martial art concept, which, when that was first explained to me, the cogs went off in my head, and I suddenly played back so many things that had happened in my life and was able to apply it to that. And it's the idea of first learning, and then detaching, and then eventually kind of transcending through these phases. So the first things I would say, frameworks have become frameworks because they're good. If you become an established and known framework, it's generally because there's some good stuff in there. So we probably should appreciate that. Sometimes frameworks get a real bashing, and I think, well, they must have done something right to become a framework and be written about and so on. But I totally agree with Tom. We shouldn't get so precious about just following the framework, because actually there's an outcome we're trying to achieve, which isn't about, well, we ticked every box of this framework, so therefore we've done our job. No, it's something contextual to whatever it is you're building or operating. So for me, the question about where do you meet the team, meeting the team where they are versus the framework, it all comes through kind of conversation and having an environment that allows continuous improvement and constant inspection and adaptation of their ways of working. So, if you're running really good retrospectives regularly, you are encouraging the team to inspect why they're doing things and how they can make themselves better, and what's optimal and what's suboptimal, and those kind of conversations. And there's a space that allows you to do that. Then when the team say things like, why are we waiting 2 weeks to release these features in a demo, but when the product owner and some users is over there, and we could just go over and show it to them and maybe release it. If the team are coming up with that, and you're thinking, well, if the team are all thinking that, they've probably matured to a state. Or, another good example is, why are we doing these 15-minute daily stand-ups? Don't get me wrong, I think the daily stand-up is one of the best practices out there. But sometimes teams mature to a level that they're so interconnected, they're pairing, they're mobbing, they just know, and it almost feels like a ritual just for the sake of a ritual. And that's when everyone's starting to say that, it's generally an indicator that we can optimize further. One more, I've just said a retrospective, but another example, I've heard of teams doing more kind of real-time retrospectives and having tools to do that. And again, if people are saying, why are we having to do this at 3:00 every Wednesday? when actually we could just go over to the board and see what the continuous feedback is, and we're getting much quicker. So I think, when the teams are, it's almost like frameworks are guardrails, but guardrails sometimes come down. And to give you one more analogy on top of Phil's, which I love, the you've got to be so high, that resonates a lot. If you've ever been 10-pin bowling, you go to the bowling alley, you find kids' parties to put these like little guardrails up so that they are always hitting the target, and they feel great. It must feel really great, right? When you're going, no matter, it bounces off, and still they knock down 8, 9, 10 pins, which is great. But eventually you've got to think, well, maybe we should turn the guardrails down, because that will feel even greater. So I think kind of frameworks are guardrails, and we should at the right time think about bringing bits of them down to optimize further.
Yeah, it's just made me think about. I really like that point, Tim, because whenever I think about things like SAFe or some of the big frameworks and the bigger, more for want of a better word, maybe cumbersome frameworks, I always think of them as training wheels. They're the things that enable you to get to this point, but what got you there isn't going to get you there. So you should. Things like probably any framework, but particularly big cumbersome frameworks like SAFe, should really be seen as a step along the way, something that helps you get to a certain point. Like you were saying, like you can knock down these pins, but actually, if you then get to that point, then you can get rid or reduce some of the guardrails. Like you in a bowling alley, there's still something stopping you throwing the ball over to behind you.
Yeah.
But getting rid of the guardrails, getting rid of the frameworks actually allows you to get even better at what you're trying to do. It opens up much more potential, but so it's much less limiting. But because frameworks can at some point become more limiting than enabling, and it's sort of finding that
Absolutely.
point, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're at is it to me means sometimes like, hey, we can take a bit and piece of this framework, a bit and piece from that framework, and put it all together because I hate this term, but every team, every program is like their own snowflake, and they require different care. They require different things, the different guardrails. Sometimes they need higher guardrails, sometimes they need shorter. It just depends. But I should be able to take something from Scrum at Scale, take something from SAFe, take something from Kanban, and combine it for what works best for that team. And that's where I really like that. Meeting the team where they're at. Like follow the framework, but I've you both said like, hey, following the framework can get you so far. You have to then advance, try different things to continue to improve.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, for sure.
That was a good one. All right, let's dig into the bowl. Go for question number 3. All right, here we go. Let's grab this guy here. Oh, this one is a good one. Was the second Death Star an Agile project? Why? Let me repeat that. Was the second Death Star an Agile project? Why?
I feel like that's a leading question.
Because I'm thinking about it because going back to Return of the Jedi, it wasn't complete. Like but they were still delivering value, and by value, they were able to blow up ships and other planets. This is horrible, but it was producing. It's like the analogy of building the car. Like you don't want to do the wheels and then the frame and then the doors when you can just here's your skateboard and then here's your scooter and then here's your motorcycle and here's your motorcycle with the cab. You're still delivering value while you're still building. So maybe it was, although their goal was to blow stuff up. Jeez.
Yeah, I think it is a good example actually of an agile approach to delivering value sooner, even though that value, like you say, is blowing up planets. I think it's also an interesting point that agile delivery can coexist with autocratic command control management practices. so you can have sort of good aspects of Agile at the same time as coexisting with very bad management practices.
Yeah, it's funny. There's nothing in the Agile Manifesto that says that the outcome has to be a good outcome. It can
True.
support and deliver evil as well. And I don't know. I guess without wanting to get too serious, there are things that, bad stuff that happens in the world, and you do look at it and you think actually they're using agile or decentralized principles to help them get that. Sadly, I look at things like terrorism and stuff like that at the minute, where it's not a big central command and control. It's actually very distributed, and there's things that intent has been set, and people are self-organizing, and people are self-governing and continuously improving all the time. So yeah, whilst we all associate agile with good, it can also deliver bad, but in a more optimal way. So maybe that is another example of that with the Death Star. So absolutely, you can see how these principles. But I think it just underlines the power of this, of the mindset. In fact, I've always said the agile mindset is a bit like the Force. It's you can't. It's very difficult to articulate, but you can feel it when it's strong. So you think about a really great agile space you've walked into. The team, the energy, it's just like the Force is strong in those people, and you can't point to why. It just is, and and equally there's an awful lot of agile projects out there where the Force is not so strong, but they're labeled that way. So yes, I think we can lend ourselves in Star Wars for quite a lot to when we think about agile.
I think Tim, you and because you said something about the sort of intention and the sort of the intent of delivering the outcome, the sort of good and bad and sort of good versus evil and stuff like that. And I think that's a really interesting point because, like the intent of the Death Star was undeniably to destroy planets, and which I think by pretty much anyone's estimation that's that's malintent, that's bad intent, but most of us are involved in have been at least involved in projects where the intent is good. We intend to build a good product, a product that serves customers, a product that makes the world a better place in some small way. But we can never be that sure about the unintended consequences of what we're building. And one of the strengths, I guess, of Agile is that we can identify those unintended consequences earlier on and maybe try and do something about it. And I'm thinking things like, maybe this isn't a greatest example, but things like Bitcoin, things like cryptocurrency. The intention behind cryptocurrency was great, create, and it was pretty theoretical. It was just let's try this thing out. Let's see if this currency based upon an algorithm and distributed network of computers works. Let's see what happens. And it was seen as quite a positive thing. And then now it turns out we're eating up like 20% of the world's power just by mining Bitcoin, and it's causing immense harm. But that was never the intention. So maybe by using agile methodologies, maybe by releasing value sooner and examining the unintended consequences sooner rather than later, we're able to mitigate some of that harm that we unintentionally cause.
Yeah. And I think visualizing, I think this is a really interesting area for me personally, this idea of connected outcomes. We're doing this thing to shift the needle on this outcome, but by doing that, it may well shift the needle on a completely different outcome at a different point in time, maybe 6, 12 months, years ahead. And it might be both positive, but it could also be negative. It could be what's good one way is actually negative another way. So I think this whole thinking allows us to focus on optimizing the whole rather than just the part, and being able to see that and to be able to connect that and visualize that.
That was a good one. That was
that
was a good one.
I didn't know where that was going to go when you asked the question. I had to think, but we got into some interesting stuff there. Yeah, I like that. Well done, whoever asked that.
That was a good one. All right, let me dig in the bowl. I think we have time for possibly two more, so let's get the fourth question. Not looking. All right. How have you seen knowledge centered services, KCS, successfully implemented while developing in an agile environment? How have you seen knowledge centered services, KCS, successfully implemented while developing an agile environment?
Could we? I don't know if you're able to, Omar, but could we define knowledge-centered
Yeah,
services?
I'm looking that up right now.
glad you asked that, Tom. I make some assumptions, but yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I had a couple of assumptions, but according to the Googles, knowledge centered service, also known as knowledge centered support or KCS, is when support teams not only provide real time customer system or employee support, but also create and maintain documentation as part of the same process.
Right. Like a knowledge base. Like they're creating, maintaining knowledge base,
Mhm.
like
And I
KB
think
article.
my assumption with the question is like, how do you maintain documentation, providing real time support while also uh,
Okay.
implementing agile environments? Because agile, sometimes some people are like, oh, it's too fast. Like it's agile. We don't need a document. It's like, whoa,
Mm. Mm.
yeah. So it's like, wait a minute. Just because the manifesto says, you know, is not that its documentation is not important. We just hold these other
Yeah,
values more.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think and that's the point, isn't it? Because the manifesto says working software over comprehensive documentation.
Yep.
And what it means in that sense is that working software comes first, is the priority, because documentation is worthless without the software. Um, and and there's this word comprehensive in there as well. Like the documentation doesn't have to be comprehensive in order to be valuable. So the you know I really do think you can take an agile approach to documentation. You don't have to have a 500-page instruction manual in order to use the first iteration of software. It could just be a few screenshots and some notes. Stage one.
Mm.
So I feel like knowledge centered services and knowledge bases and this sort of stuff. I feel like they tie in really really well with agile delivery. I feel like the agile approach to software is the same, to me at least. It's the same approach I would use for the documentation itself.
Yeah.
And
So there's some practices that it's kind of back to, for me, some of the very first agile practices I learned, I still think are hit the sweet spot here. So the definition of done, right? I just think the
yes.
definition of done was one of the most fundamental, great practices I learned. Yeah, because we are so inconsistent when we say something's done. And if documentation is an important part, maybe for compliance reasons or for
Hmm.
knowledge sharing reasons, whatever, well, we make it a part of the definition done and we do it as we go along. What are we trying to avoid? We're trying to avoid where we want to, put something into production and then suddenly goes, oh, hang on a minute, you haven't done this, 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 and this. And
Hmm.
documentation sometimes falls into one of this buckets. So I think, you know, the principles behind definition of done is just a great way to try and get some control over that. Um, I go back to probably the first agile project that I was where I really saw the light back in about 2005, 2006. There were some awesome engineers in the team who just had really creative ways of doing documentation. So some of it was automated. It was kind of documentation as code, which blew my mind.
Hmm.
It's like it was this beautiful PDF that was being the Jenkins server, it was a Hudson server there, was spitting it out on every build, and I just blew my mind when the empowered team kind of came up with ways to do the documentation that wasn't going to be kind of mundane and boring for them. And that was nearly 20 years ago. You think how many products are on the market now to help with this problem, to help automate. And as Tom was saying, documentation doesn't necessarily mean big long PDFs. It can be a video. It can be you can probably do documentations in VR now. You've got photo. There's really quick ways to get the outcome. So I think it's all about finding out, well, what is the actual need here? What is the actual outcome we're trying to achieve with this documentation, and what is the quickest way to deliver so that it has the impact? And there's there's more and more ways to do that, to surface that now.
I mean, to yes end that, in your environment, I think it's best as you build your your software delivery teams. Don't just have just engineers. You want that truly cross-functional team where, hey, we need to make documentation part of definition done. Okay, cool. Let's make sure we have a technical writer on our team, because sometimes developers probably are not the best writers, and that's okay. We lean on our technical writers. So I've been on a couple of projects where we have had technical writers on the team, and that was their sole focus, working, shoulder to shoulder with the developers, and then documenting process, documenting how things work or just the directions. And then boom, it's part of the definition of done, and that gets packaged up and it gets delivered.
Like it a lot, and potentially automated.
Yes. Automate everything.
Yeah. Automation is your friend. Yeah.
Very good. I think we have time for one more. Let's dig into here and let's grab one. All right, let's see. What do we have here? Oops, two are stuck together. We'll grab this one. Ooh, we might talk about this for 20 minutes. What's the best retrospective format you've ever used, and why was it effective? I'll repeat that. What's the best retrospective format you've ever used, and why was it effective? This one just goes deep because there's so many great formats out there. But I'll let both of you go first before I talk about some of my favorites.
Yeah, there's almost too much to dive into, and there's so much to address here. Like, I know Tim's going to have loads to say about this.
Oh, yeah.
I think that for me, it's worth recognizing, first of all, that there are different retrospectives with different purposes. And if I can sort of briefly take us back into a bit of theory, like there's a concept of safety 1 and safety 2. Eric Holnagel came up with these a few years ago. Safety 1 is looking back at what went wrong and trying to stop those things from going wrong in the future. So think about, there might have been an outage in production, and we run a retrospective or root cause analysis or a similar sort of incident analysis or something to work out what went wrong and prevent that thing from happening again. And that's really valuable. That happens a lot. That happens a lot in every domain, not just technology, but in every domain around the world, in manufacturing, aviation, healthcare, and everything else. Then there's safety 2. Safety 2 looks at what went right and tries to make more of the right things happen. And so if we look at sort of safety 1 can result in lots of compliance and governance and policies and automations and protections and things. Safety 2 can build on practices and behaviors and capabilities and technologies. We need both in order to perform better. And retrospectives certain types of retrospectives lean more towards the safety 1 approach, and certain types of retrospectives lean more towards the safety 2 approach. Mm-hmm. Some of the best retrospectives kind of try and do both at the same time, but I think it can be sometimes quite difficult to do both at the same time in some cases, because we're trying to sort of switch our heads into different gears. So a very long way of saying, for me, the most effective retrospective is the one that you do most often. Mm-hmm. As long as you do it often, you build that muscle, you build that habit. Mm-hmm. I don't care too much about the format, as long as you're doing them regularly and building that habit, building that muscle.
Totally agree. I've just been going through my directory or my memory bank of retrospectives, and yeah, but like what Tom was saying, the format doesn't stand out. I remember an Elvis retrospective once, and it was a lot of fun. And at the time, it was exactly the right kind of format. It just worked. We pinpointed it didn't need to be too serious, and it got us into creative juices going. Other times it's been a really focused on a problem, and we've gone into kind of 5 whys and a fishbone diagram. And at the time, it just we came out and going, God, we've really shone light on that problem. So I can't really see a favorite format. I think it depends on the context, it depends on the team, it depends on previous retros you've done with them. Um, but I feel that's cheating by just saying it depends. So I am going to share not a format, but I guess an approach, which I learned years ago called the pub retro. So retrospective in the pub. Now I'm an Irish guy, so I like going to the pub. That's a bit of a generalization, but it happens to be true. Most people like going to the pub if you're from Ireland, and indeed if you're not from Ireland. So I worked with an engineer. Again, it was one of the guys that really showed me Agile and things without realizing that's what it was at the time. And he always said we should do our retros down the pub. And we were using Scrum pretty much by the book at the time. And our sprints were finishing on a Friday. So it was 2-week sprints. So Friday afternoons, we'd do the sprint review at 2:00. And then at 3:00, we'd go down the pub. And sometimes we went to like the bowling alley. We talked about bowling early. That's why I always think of Agile with bowling. And over the months, in fact, years that followed, I discovered that pub retros just seemed to be really, really impactful, really powerful. And when we tried to do them in the office space, it just didn't work as well. And I've kind of put it down to 3 reasons. I think it is good to get out of the thing you're in to do the retro. So if you're sitting in the same space, it's sometimes you just don't get that removal to do the inspection, which is obviously inspection is kind of one of the first parts of the retro. So just getting yourself away into a different space just allows you to reflect in a different way. Honesty, that's the first point. The second one is I don't know. You have a beer. Some people have a beer and they're a little bit more honest and a little bit more vocal, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes, not that I'm sort of encouraging it. It has to be that way, but it's but yeah, I don't know. It just seemed to be that when we would go away, have a bit of not just it wasn't necessarily the beer or the alcohol. It was just going to a place where people felt a bit freer and safer. It was a bit loud. There was some music on. I've been to some funny pubs where there's lots of locals in there, and we're all in with the sticky notes on the walls. I mean, it must look quite funny to the outsider, but for some reason that space everyone feels that little bit more relaxed, and therefore that promotes that kind of the honesty and also the ideation. I think some of the simplest ideas have just come out from being in that space. So that's the sort of second, and then the third, the whole principle, why do we do iterative and incremental development? It's because we are shipping or potentially shipping products at the end of the sprint. When you do a big go live after years and years of development, usually there's some kind of celebration event. Well, if you're using Agile or Scrum, effectively you should do that every sprint. So, going off site to a pub or to a bowling alley, or we've done different sports, we've been to like tea rooms in London. It just seemed like, well, let's do the celebration every 2 weeks. It's one of the benefits of working in iterations, that we get to do celebrations much more little and often, rather than a huge big bang weekend at the end of the waterfall delivery, which is what we used to do. So pub retros still get the big thumbs up, and that's what I would encourage people to try doing if they can.
So yeah, I think I'd just really like to build on that, because I think that's such a key point, that the context and the environment is so much more important than the format.
Yeah,
and it's the context and environment that you create that is everything. You could do any format you like. If the context and environment isn't good, it's not going to work.
Absolutely. That said, I know Omar has had some amazing creative formats. I learned a lot of different formats of him, so I'd love to hear your answer on this.
Yeah, so like for me, it's about recently, especially since COVID's all been virtual, is you got to set the stage. And by setting the stage, I mean, some people will come in from another meeting. They're trying to context switch. They're not there yet. So I always use the 5 minute rule. So that first 5 minutes, you can use water cooler time just to just have conversation about anything, just to get people to relax, or just have some tomfoolery, just some fun little mini icebreaker to kind of get everybody at ease so that they're ready. Recently, I used a superhero icebreaker. It was a simple question: what superhero power do you want to use? And I used a tool where people can vote. It's a polling tool, so you can see like the changes on the live. I'm like, oh, look, super strength is now number one. Oh, invisibility is coming up, and people are like, this is fun. They get excited, and to the point of like taking people out of their environments. Like, hey, I'm at home, but I'm at ease. I don't feel like I'm in a work meeting. The stage is set, and then we can go into that format. And to what you said earlier, Tim, about like, I don't want to just say that it depends, but sometimes it does, because it depends on, to me, it depends on the size of the group and how much time do you have. Typically, sometimes we have no control. Where like you have an hour, like okay, an hour is sometimes is not enough time to get a lot of stuff done in a retrospective, because the goal of the retrospective is, hey, we inspected, we adapted. What are some of the action items? What are the takeaways? What are the experiments we're going to try? So I like to set the stage first, but format wise, I have a bunch that I use. If you want something quick to the point, I like the 3 L's: liked, learned, um, loved. Wait, it was liked, lacked, learned.
Lacked. Yeah.
Basically, it's the 4 L's. Yes, but I take off the longed for, because I always feel like longed and lacked are similar. So I just do the 3 L's. So that way we get to the point. I also like to make sure we have kudos. So we'll say, during the if you're using a 2 week iteration, like, hey, let's shine a light on some of the heroes that we had during the 2 weeks. But I like to use those. Some of my favorite formats from our good friend Mary over in EMEA as well. She uses a virtual whiteboard, Miro. She's created some awesome retrospective formats. Like she did a Ghostbusters one, a Back to the Future. I still use those to this day. So it's an awesome format to use. So it's always good to make it themes. Like there was a team I was working with previously where they were kind of very introverted. So I asked the manager, I was like, what kind of movies or do they like video games? And they're like, oh, they all like Harry Potter. Perfect. So we made a Harry Potter themed retrospective using a virtual tool. And as soon as they saw the board, I was playing the Harry Potter music in the background. Everybody got into it. Everybody was at ease, and they talked so much. And they were able to communicate, because sometimes, as you know, you get the retrospective, it is silence. You really have to like pull. It's like pulling teeth, getting that information out of them. But if you set the stage in like the format you use, just use a theme. It can be like what went well, what do we need to improve, and then action items. That's fine, but set that stage, theme it out, so people are like, oh, this is cool. Play music in the background, make it fun, so that people can open up and share their thoughts and their ideas, and collectively we can come up with action items that will be solutions to some of these problems. But one, I will say my favorite to this day that I still love was the Oscar retro, and I ran out a few times doing workshops where after the workshop, you have themes like which exercise was the best, which one of these agile principles or values will you take back with you, what change your culture. But we did it like, okay, let's everybody vote, and then the award goes to this one, and then we had like the Oscar music playing in the background. Like me, I'm a big extrovert, so I went to welcome to the Oscars, and for best actor is this, like, I totally got into it, made it fun, and then everybody had a great time. So as long as you make it fun and you set the stage, you're going to have a great retrospective.
Love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Makes me want to go. I miss your retrospectives, Omar. Makes me want to go to one. Maybe we should do a retrospective after this.
We should. All right. Well, very good. This was a great session with both of you. Thank you so much for joining me today on Agile Table Topics. And where can folks find you? So, Tim, I'll ask you first.
So probably the best place to connect with me is at the minute is all about my company Stellafai. So check us out at www.stellafai.com. That's spelt STELLAFAI. See what we did there. So we're on the web at stellafai.com. We have a LinkedIn page. I'm also on Twitter, and my handle is Tim Beattie, TIMBEATTIE.
Tom.
Thanks, Omar. If people want to find out more about psych safety, head over to psychsafety.co.uk. There's a whole bunch of stuff there. There's loads of articles and resources about psychological safety in teams and organizations around the world in different contexts. There's a weekly newsletter that you can sign up to. There's an online community of over 500 people now, I think. There are fairly regular meetups. The next one is in December. The last one was fantastic, was about neurodiversity with Sam Newth. And and there's a bunch of other stuff there as well you can dive into. And you can get in touch with me if you email tom@psychsafety.co.uk. Equally, I'm also on Twitter. If you want to grab me, I'm at Tom_Geraghty. So TOM_GERAGHTY. It'd be great to hear from some folks.
Excellent. Thank you both so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. And folks, we will see you later.